Hello there, John Kuturillo here, the counsellor of your listener. Thank you for joining me for this episode. As per usual, thank you to everyone who makes it possible for me to live my vision every day, be you a client who allows me the privilege of entering into your life to help you with your goals, or as a listener or supporter of the podcast, thank you to everyone. In today's episode, I'm going to be exploring the issue of how parents treat their children in the process of helping them to yield success or the best performance in life, most notably when it comes to school and academia, but this can also be applied to other domains of life. Now, as per usual, if you have any concerns of your own, about your own life, about someone else's life, about your children, please do not take what you find on the internet as advice. Seek professional help. This is just for general discussion purposes. Any good parent wants what's best for their child, and in any case, every child benefits from a certain level of challenge and from a certain instilling of discipline in their life. When you introduce challenge into a child's life at just the right intensity, it teaches them to cope with other types of challenges, to solve problems, to deal with adversity. It helps them to develop resilience. But as I've stated in the past, anything good such as challenge and discipline can be taken too far. It can be taken to extremes to the point that it's no longer healthy. It must be balanced. And when it comes to helping our children achieve the best possible academic success, there are a number of questions that we have to ask ourselves. We have to ask, will this actually lead to practical success in the real world? And we have to ask, am I doing this for the right reasons? And the answers to these questions are not always as they seem, even though they are complicated and there may not always be a clear answer. When it comes to the correlation between educational performance or academic performance and success in the real world, education isn't always as it seems. Now, arguably throughout history, there have always been issues with how we practice education, and this is a discussion for a different context, but at least from what I've observed in Australia, education has some serious drawbacks, and they're not necessarily what we would call accidents or oversights. It seems like that some of the goals we're trying to achieve with education aren't always what they should be. And what I'm about to suggest is not to discount or deride the academic achievements of children nowadays. This is to do with how we actually conduct education and what we can practically use it for. Academia has been overly simplified, and there have been a number of suggestions that we've essentially done this because we want our educational institutions to create the illusion of success as a society without actually having to go to the effort of making practical success. And what I mean by that is education seems to be a business, and when students fail, it doesn't create a good impression of the institution. It's not good for business. It quite plausibly derives from the philosophy that no child should be made to feel bad, that every child should obtain a participation certificate, or every child should obtain a participation medal, so to speak. We've been so affected by what's happened in the past, in which children were abused and coerced into living in ways that were beneficial, supposedly beneficial for society and for the system, but not beneficial for themselves and ultimately harmful for them, that we've become overly sensitized, and now we don't want to place children under any pressure at all, regardless of whether it's actually a healthy level of pressure. And one of the ways that we've tried to reflect that is by making education too simple, making it too easy to pass, or just refusing to fail children altogether. It creates the illusion that we've become a smarter society, but then if you change the definition of what constitutes intelligence, then ultimately you can make anything look intelligent, which again is not to say that children are responsible for making society look good, and we certainly should not be persecuting them in any way. But the facts are that when you make something too simple, not only are you not truly reflecting the idea that you claim to, that is to say intelligence in this case, what you're also doing is not setting up those students for success in the real world, because real life will not make itself simpler for you. That's an absolute fact. Another problem here is that trade education, that is to say apprenticeships and technical education conducted at technical colleges, are still treated as an alternative. It seems that children ultimately are being indoctrinated into a culture where they're encouraged to go to university more, they're encouraged to pursue academic education, and trades are seen as the route for people who don't fit into the academic system. In reality, this is a complete fallacy, because much of what we need in the world relies on technical education, on trade education, on people who are educated as tradesmen, as craftsmen, as technicians. They're just as important as any person with an academic education. To treat it as an alternative is basically to suggest if you are a tradesperson, you are less than an academic in some way. But the facts are that not only is it a fallacy when you consider what the world actually needs and what it can actually do for the person, that is to say, allow them a job in which they will always have work, in which they can start their own business and make a good living for themselves and be independent, which is one of the best forms of dignity, is independence, financially and otherwise. Not only is that a fallacy when you consider that, but also every person has different skills, and you can't say that just because someone doesn't have a given set of specialized skills that are drawn from education, that they're necessarily less than. Yes, there are certain skills we all need to be independent and to look after ourselves, but when it comes to professions, those skills are so specialized that not every person can have every set of skills, which means that the better way to help someone be independent in their career is to actually help them find what skills they have and then match them to a job that is going to allow them to earn a living for themselves. What's also important to understand is that in the workforce, a lot of roles for which employers hire don't make use of the education that the institutions say they will. A lot of institutions will tell you, if you get this academic education, you'll be able to get this job, and this job. But then when you observe what happens in the job market, often what happens is employers will want a completely different education to what your institution may have said, or they just want experience. But then if no employers are providing on-the-job training or a job to entry-level individuals, then how is anyone going to get the experience that these employers demand? A lot of this experience can't be obtained from mainstream education. And if we constantly push our children to attend university and they find that it's not for them, they find that their skills just aren't matched to it, or they find that the number of jobs which are accessible to them after they graduate isn't as broad as what their institutions claim they were, then they may end up falling into a completely different career out of desperation because they can't find a job elsewhere, which means you've essentially set them up to make a number of choices with which they're not going to be satisfied. But in the end, who wins? If people are constantly going back to study because what they studied previously didn't get them the job they wanted or didn't get them any job, the institutions make more money off that. If a secondary school has a graduating class with a large number of high scores, that's good for them commercially. But as I will most likely discuss in the future, high scores don't necessarily correlate well with how much real-world skill a person has. So if you're pushing your child to perform academically, ask yourself critically whether you're actually facilitating their success in the real world or whether you're just pushing them to play a game that's played by a system that wants to use them to make itself look good for commercial gain. Now, if you wanted to make the argument that success in school can help you in the sense that it teaches you to adapt to different challenges, then yes, that is a valid argument. And if a student is well aware that what they're being pushed to achieve in school isn't necessarily going to correlate with success in the real world, but at least they're aware of it and they know how they can find success in the real world, and they're passing school as a way to play the game, so to speak, in order to have access to the paths that are going to obtain them success in later in life, then that's healthier. But blindly following what the education system tells you without having any real-world insight, without having any reassurance that what you're doing is actually going to lead to the outcome, is not setting yourself up for success. On this subject, what you also have to consider are kids' natural desires and their natural enthusiasm. A child, or even most teenagers, can't be expected to know what they want, often by the time they leave secondary school, especially considering that our education system doesn't expose students to a broad enough range of possible skills and possible paths in life. From what I know, most mainstream secondary schools don't provide a lot of insight into, say, trade subjects or technical education. It's all based on academia. There's plenty of art, but then unfortunately that doesn't have a massive industry. It's mostly academia. Now again, academia has its place in the job market, but it's not the only component of the job market. There are opportunities for technically educated or trade-educated individuals. And if a child hasn't had exposure to any of this and doesn't actually know what exists in the real world, how can you expect them to know what they want or what they're good at or what they're not good at? A lot of children don't know why they're being forced to succeed. They will develop ideas based on it. They'll develop the schema that if they want to impress their parents, if they want to make their parents happy, if they don't want to be ridiculed or shamed, or if they want to succeed in life, then they had better achieve well. But it's very easy for a child to develop unhealthy ideas based on this. While you can't always choose what you want in life and you have to learn to adapt to life's contingencies, all humans function more effectively when they are intrinsically motivated. That is to say, when they're pursuing something because they personally find meaning in it. And one of the components in finding meaning in something is actually being good at it, having the skills to do it well. If you manipulate a child in a major way, in the sense of forcing them to achieve, but without them actually knowing what they're doing, or why they're doing it, or what the benefit for them is going to be, or even what some of the alternatives are, over time, they're going to feel the effects of that. They're going to feel more stressed than they have to be. They're going to develop unhealthy ideas about the world, i.e., if I don't perform well in this quite insular, self-contained institution that we call academia, then my parents won't like me, society won't like me, I'll be a no-hoper, I'll be useless to society, I won't get a good job. Children can develop these ideas even if they're not taught them explicitly, because children's brains are constantly trying to make sense of the world and constantly trying to draw conclusions about how the world works. They need to be exposed to the right ideas, and they also need to learn how to critically analyze faulty ideas, because if they don't learn that, then they may be subject to actually absorbing those ideas and living by them. And if you don't want your child to fail, a good way to stop them, a good way to help them not fail is to make sure that they don't absorb faulty ideas that are going to lead them to failure. It's not just academic success that prevents failure. If they perceive that the world is constantly threatening, given that their parents are constantly putting them under undue pressure, they're going to keep a lot of that tension within them. And it can also lead to problems regulating emotion in a healthy way. A lot of these emotional problems that we see in people, having a short temper or constantly snapping at people, constantly making impulsive decisions, or constantly becoming too attached to other people. A lot of these emotional and psychological problems develop when a child is treated as an asset and basically taught all that matters in the world is someone else's opinion. You don't have a face, you don't have a personality, you are just there to do blindly what society tells you. That is not a shortcut to a healthy psychology. Children, whether you like it or not, whether you believe it or not, have a natural desire to explore the world, to learn skills, to ask questions, to learn things. If you nurture a child and you actually explain the whys and not just the whats, explain why they should do certain things or not do certain things, and not just what they should and shouldn't do, explain how the world works, feed them healthy, rational, valid ideas instead of distorted ones that are born out of simply tradition or born out of society's faults but don't actually have a connection to real world validity. If you teach them these healthy ideas and you show them, hey, if you succeed in academia, these are the opportunities available to you, but look at all these other things you can do as well. And people can be functioning members of society doing that, and you can be happy as well. And then actually take them through opportunities to actually explore what their personal skills are. Obviously do it safely, but show them tools, how to build things, how to fix things. Show them how to write, show them how to work with numbers, show them all kinds of skills, expose them to different people in different industries, and really show them what's available in the world. Then you give them a chance to intrinsically decide what's right for them. And then if it's something in which they can have a career and then you allow them to nurture that, they're much more likely to succeed in the long term. Of course, expose them to other things as well and get them to challenge themselves with a range of different things, but at the same time, allow them to pursue intrinsically motivated activities. What we also need to ask, as I said, is, are we pushing our children for the right reasons? Unfortunately, throughout history, parents have and will continue to try to live through their children. Often parents have a sense of personal pride in how well their child achieves. And if their child achieves well, they perceive it as reflecting well on them and they appreciate the status that brings. Maybe some parents have unfulfilled dreams. They wanted to be successful in certain ways and they weren't, and having their children succeed is their way of essentially actualizing their dreams without actually doing it themselves. There may be cultural reasons why success is an honor on the family. Regardless of what factor may lead you to do this, the only valid reason to push your children is to help them be successful functioning members of society in which they can have independence, have a healthy mind and have healthy bodies and live well. If you are doing it for anything that relates to your own personal pride, you're doing it for the wrong reasons. And you need to involve your children in the process. At any stage, if it involves shame and manipulation tactics or you pure fear-mongering, then that's a warning that you're doing it for the wrong reasons. Yes, you need to warn children sometimes that if they do the wrong thing, they may find themselves in trouble. That needs to be made salient. But if you have genuinely no idea whether a certain path is actually going to lead to a child's success or whether they have the intrinsic motivation or the skill to actually pursue a certain path, and you're just pushing it because, well, society says so or the school says so, therefore it must be true, what you've allowed to happen is for society to brainwash you into thinking that just because the system says so, that it must be right. What I've always said, and it's a fact whether you like it or not, ideas do not necessarily become popular because they're true. They become popular because they play on people's emotions and they allow the masses to be controlled. You have allowed yourself in this situation to be convinced that the system has your best interests in mind. In reality, the best person to have your interests in mind is yourself. Big, powerful institutions are a means of control, and that's the way that the human mind works. Healthy minds follow pursuits in small areas of society, running small businesses, within their families, within themselves. People who want to be hugely successful and control masses of people, there is always psychological corruption inherent in that. If you are blindly following what a system tells you and projecting a desire to seek personal pride from being successful onto your children, you are seriously risking harming them psychologically. The idea that children are basically just uncivilized blank slates in which they will blindly follow what you tell them and they won't understand any part of it and they'll simply do it because they love you or because they trust you is just not true. Children understand more than they can communicate. And if they're coerced in any way, without you balancing challenge and discipline with guidance and nurturance, then they're at serious risk of developing an unhealthy psychology that can then affect their later relations with people and affect how they live their lives in not very healthy ways. Parenting is an effortful process. And if you're not willing to put the effort in, then quite frankly, you shouldn't be a parent. Raising your children well requires you to take gentle steps with your children, to teach them, this is why the world works the way it does. This is what you can do to be successful. These are the choices that you can make. And if you make these different types of choices, these might be the outcomes. Take responsibility, explore what's out there, ask questions. Teaching them healthy functioning is always a challenge, but that is the only way. That is the way to give your child the best chance of developing a healthy mind and actually being able to live in the real world. Something that we also need to mention is that when a child clearly has a disability that impedes their learning and their parents don't want them in special education because it may reflect badly on them or because they don't want to think that their child is disabled, you're seriously dehumanizing them. It's not a child's fault that they have trouble learning. It's not anyone's fault that they're disabled. If you really want what's best for them, find them the help that they need. Now, it may be the case that in certain facilities or in certain institutions, children with learning difficulties don't always get treated that well. Right? Like in psychiatric institutions, patients don't always get treated that well. Often they're quite frightening places. We know that there have been stories in the news about particular special education institutions abusing children over the years. Those are all valid concerns, but it doesn't negate the need for a child to have special intervention when they have learning difficulties. It just means that you need to get objective quality guidance, which again can be hard to judge sometimes. Where does society need to make help for children with disabilities more available? And we need to hold ourselves to higher standards when it comes to the quality of services we deliver. But at the same time, the child can't find these opportunities on their own. They need your help. If your child is struggling, you need to get professional advice on how to best help them. Don't let your pride get in the way and say, my child will never be subject to special education. I don't want anyone else to think that they're stupid. In conclusion, our contemporary civilization is by definition a competitive one. And we live in an economy in which competition is necessary. And I'm not saying we should destroy that because that would have even worse consequences. We need to learn to live in the economy. We need to learn to live in the system that we, over time, have created for ourselves. Certainly not saying it's necessarily inherently good or perfect, but within the circumstances, we have to work within a system. Sometimes that is just a necessary part of life. And teaching children to cope with what they can't control sometimes is extremely important. But much of what we have created in our so-called civilized world is invented and it's unnatural. Nature didn't invent currency. They didn't invent economy. Nature invented human beings, gave us basic needs, and for much of human history, we directly sought those needs. We hunted, we gathered food, we built shelter, we cared for each other. Placing a child in the rat race that is the academic education game and calling that natural and then being upset when your child can't perform is not necessarily going to solve problems. Children need to understand how the world works. They need guidance. And we need to understand that if your child is not academically inclined, just pushing them to perform is not necessarily going to help. Sometimes getting them the right help may, but everyone has a different set of skills and there are a range of different ways in which people could find a career using their skills. The best thing to do is to find where your child's skills are and help them to develop them and nurture them in a way that's going to help them survive. The economy is an unnatural survival need. It's not a natural one. We invented it. When we set up our kids for life, we need to teach them, yes, you're going to have to do things in life that you don't want to do. Yes, you're going to have to live in a system. Yes, you're going to have to work with it. But while seeking excellence is healthy and a necessary part of living life, we also need to do it for the right reasons, and we need to be sympathetic to the way that the human mind develops and provide developing minds the right environment so that they develop in a healthy way. So thank you for joining me for this episode. As per usual, if you have any concerns at all, for any reason, please seek professional advice. And if you would like to be a guest on the show, or you have an idea for a topic to discuss, or you have any commentary, please feel free to contact me. I'd love to hear from you. And until next time, take care.